Imagine that this juicy ripe apple represents the words of the English language. Only this part, about 33%, is Germanic. This part, about 15%, is from Latin. This sliver, about 5%, is from Old Norse. And most of the rest, about 41%, is from French. Of course, statistics will differ depending on whether you include obscure technical words or just include the more common words. I prefer just to include the common words, which is how I get these statistics. You might ask the question, if English is teeming with all this French, why do linguists place it on the family tree amongst the other Germanic languages such as German, Dutch, Swedish, as you see here? Of course, a language is not just vocabulary, but of all the Germanic languages, English is the least Germanic-y. It's an outlier. After the Norman conquest of 1066, in addition to the vocabulary, English grammar got simplified and became a bit Frenchified. This gave rise to the hypothesis that English had become a French Creole. A number of linguists have put forward this theory. Is it true? Let's investigate. First of all, what is a Creole? According to the Cambridge English Dictionary, it's a type of language that developed from a mixture of different languages and which is now spoken by a group of people as their first language. And these are the characteristics of a Creole. Creoles have a high percentage of vocabulary from the invaders' language. That would be the Normans. The invaders' language causes the simplification of the original language, and it begins to reflect the invaders' language. There will continue to be influences from the local language in terms of grammar and vocabulary. In an earlier video, I looked at the first paragraph of Harry Potter, and it's worth returning to that just for a second. So here it is, and as you can see, about 50% of the words on the first page are of French origin. And I challenge you to go through your recent emails and look up the etymology of each word. Unless you're a doctor or a physicist or a feng shui consultant, you'll find that consistently about 50% of the words you use are of French origin. It's true that the nuts and bolts words are Germanic. The, with, but, and, this, that, and the modal verbs may, might, can, should, and some common verbs, go, be, the verb to have, etc. Though not etc. That's from Latin. The pronouns are a mix of Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse, and some everyday words too come from Anglo-Saxon, such as friend, book, hot, cold. And what about this section of the fruit? Old Norse. If anyone tells you that Old Norse has no influence on the English language, tell them they are wrong. They are wrong. Those words are from Old Norse. That's just a little joke. Please yourself. One misconception is that French words are the elite, the highbrow words, the words used by intellectuals and legal terms and military terms. Well, yes, they are the elite and highbrow words, but they also make up so many of our everyday words. The working class words, the words used by plebs like me. There are so many French words in English that they are everywhere. Don't believe me? Go through your most recent emails and they'll be full of French words like please, really, very, because, perfect, probably, possibly, prefer, number, important, conversation, use, usually, just, polite, rude, table, chair, tune, people, reason, language, fruit, adventure. Not all words, but you'll see consistently around 50%. And if you remove the prepositions and articles and the verb to be and the verb to have and just leave the words of substance, it's even more. Am I right? Let me know in the comments. There's another one. So let's look at why there are so many French words in English. Now, I've covered this subject in detail in more than one video, so I'm going to make this short. Anglo-Saxon, also known as Old English, was the language spoken in England before 1066. Then came along William and his mostly Norman army and conquered England. They spoke a French dialect called Norman French. For the next few centuries, that became the language of the ruling class in England. Now that language is referred to as Anglo-Norman. What happened to English during this time? Well, it was still spoken by the peasant classes, but as a written language between 1066 and 1350, there are very few works written in English. It's only in the late 14th century did English become the language of prestige in England again. But by then, it was a different language. In the centuries following the Norman conquest, administration and government records were written either in Latin or in French, not in English. English was the third language in its own country. Long after the Norman conquest, French was the language of prestige in England, and French words continued to pour in. The first king that had English as his mother tongue since the Norman conquest was Henry IV, born in 1367. So for at least 300 years, the rulers of England spoke French, not English. We've already established that an enormous amount of English vocabulary comes directly from French, and quite a lot from Latin too. But did the influence of French change English grammar? Languages broadly fall into two categories: analytic languages and synthetic languages. English is mostly an analytic language. This means that the language heavily relies on word order to express meaning, and that you build sentences with different types of words, verbs and nouns and adjectives, and they're glued together with prepositions and articles. So, for example, the lady saw the man. The man saw the lady. Not the same. You can't move the words around without changing the meaning. In English, you're usually stuck with subject, verb, object. But in the other types of languages, you can. Those types of languages are known as synthetic languages. In a synthetic language, you can use inflections and word endings to change the meaning to a word to indicate its relationship to other words. So in these type of languages, word order isn't so important. Here's an example taken from Making Sense, the Glamorous Story of English Grammar by David Crystal. One of the sources for this video. An excellent read. The link is in the description. This is the same phrase. The lady saw the man, in Old English this time. All phrases mean the same thing. As you can see, the endings tell us who is doing what to whom. The man saw the lady would be like this. The word endings have changed. By the time of Middle English, most of the inflections in English had gone, and English followed more originally the pattern of French. And guess what? In French too, word order is pretty much fixed. Were French speakers using English responsible for this change? It's a theory, though I should point out another theory, and that is, it was these guys. Yes, the Vikings. In large areas of England, they spoke Old Norse, but in those same areas, Anglo-Saxons lived too, and Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse were similar but different languages. I guess in the same way as Spanish and Italian are similar but different. So when an Anglo-Saxon speaker met an Old Norse speaker, they ended up speaking in a way that was easier for their interlocutor to understand. And in this way, inflections got lost. And there is evidence that some English inflections were starting to drop off before the Norman conquests. So was it the French? Was it the Vikings? Certainly the Normans in England trying to speak English would have found it easier to revert to their familiar word order, just as anybody does when they learn a foreign language. And if they weren't wholly responsible, they could have sped up the process. Who's there? It's me. Have you noticed that in English we say it's me and not it's I? And that reflects the French, c'est moi, whereas most other European languages use the subject pronoun. In Italian, sono io. But just like French, we gravitate towards the object pronoun, even when classic grammar says it should be the subject pronoun. Here's one more example of that. Look at this sentence. Most people would say, "It was not me who stole the pearls, it was him." That's similar to the way it's said in French, but different from most other European languages. In French it's "Ce n'est pas moi qui a volé les perles, c'était lui." In English, there are a few sticklers who insist on saying, "It was not I who stole the pearls, it was he." But that's not a natural way of speaking. They are in a minority. The plural S. In English, plurals are normally made by adding an S. In French, plurals are also normally made by adding an S. In Old English, plurals were formed in various ways. And we still see that in modern English, where a few words still have this Anglo-Saxon endings. For example, ox, one ox, two oxen, brothers and brethren. Or with a vowel change, we still say man, men, goose, geese, mouse, mice. But overwhelmingly, the plural is with S. Now, there are lots of ways to make plurals in Old English, and adding S did exist prior to the Norman conquest. However, it's been argued that the reason why the S won out against the other ways of marking the plural is because of, yes, French. Of. In English, we still use the possessive S to say who something belongs to. Bob's apple. When we're not talking about people, we might use a form with of, which corresponds exactly to the French. So, for example, the back of the house translates word for word from the French, l'arrière de la maison. We don't say the house is back, the taste of the fruit, not the fruit's taste. From the bottom of my heart, it's not the same as my heart's bottom, or maybe it is. Again, you might find similar constructions in other Germanic languages, but it's very common in English. But its shift during Middle English suggests that the influence of French grammar may at least partially explain its prevalence. This section is called God Almighty, it's a beef Wellington. Chicken tikka masala may be the national dish of Britain, but the word order is French. In English, adjectives come before the noun, the big house, not the house big. Or do they? Sometimes it's the other way around. Culinary dishes often take this format. For example, beef Wellington, not Wellington beef. Peach Melba, not Melba peach. Whiskey sour. Some legal terms follow this pattern. Attorney General, Court Martial, Heir Apparent. President-elect, not elected president. Treasure trove. And a few other expressions. Time immemorial, proof positive, code red, mission impossible. Pound sterling, Waterloo East, God Almighty, life everlasting. Side note here, you place the plural S at the end of the first word of the phrase. So the plural of mission impossible is missions impossible. It's heirs apparent. But what about beef Wellington? Is it beeves Wellington? Because beeves is the plural of beef. Or is it beef Wellingtons? I say it's uncountable, so it's the same. 5 beef Wellington, please. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I hope you're able to derive some glorious linguistic merriment from this important presentation. What? What's that? Oh yes, we can't do without those French suffixes. And here are a few. And don't forget those pesky French prefixes too, such as these. The Queen and the child stood on the bridge on the ship. Could you read that? Did you know that French spelling conventions have been used in many English words? I just gave a few examples. Here's one more. In French, OU is pronounced OU. And that's why house and mouse are written that way. But I hear you say, but no, it's house, it's not hoose. Ah, yes, but they used to be pronounced hoose and moose before the great vowel shift. So modern English spelling sometimes reflects how things were pronounced 500 years ago, which were based on French spelling conventions. It's ridiculous. Hashtag spelling reform. Anyway, this merits a video all on its own, so I'll leave it there, except to say that one thing that really gets my goat about the French is your accent. No, I don't mean your funny way of speaking, but rather the little squiggles and lines above French words. And that's fine. I have no problem with those lines and squiggles in French, but one day you're merrily typing and you want to say to your friend that you'll see them in the cafe, and you remember that the word cafe comes from French, and in English we've maintained the accent, but you can't remember where it is on the keyboard, so you spend 10 minutes trying to work it out. And of course I could leave out the accent, but then it would be cafe. I mean, who wants to meet in a cafe? And any hip person knows that a better way to spell it would be like this, cafe. But we don't, because that doesn't sound sophisticated enough, innit? Eating a crème brûlée in the cafe with my fiancée, such a cliche. How could I have been so naive? It was just a facade. If you take all these elements separately, they don't seem much, but when you add them up, it's quite a lot. But, and there is a big but, and this is going to blow your mind, some say yes, English is indeed a Creole, but not a French one. It was these guys. It's the influence of Old Norse. It's a Scandinavian Creole. I've already talked a lot about that in this video here, but basically the Vikings changed English so much, not just in terms of vocabulary, but more the grammar, and some argue that English is a Scandinavian language. That's why those from Sweden, Norway, and Denmark find it easier to learn English than anyone else. Anyway, check out my other video to learn more about that. So I guess you want me to reach a conclusion. I'm not an academic in this field, and there is no way I can give a definitive answer. But from my research, it seems that no. I'm English, and I speak French, and for me, they're just too different. Clearly there is an influence, but French speakers find it less easy to learn English than do Scandinavians or the Dutch, probably the Germans too. So I say that it's a theory worth considering, but no, lots of words come from French, but structurally they are too dissimilar. However, I'd like to know your thoughts. So what is English if it's not a French or Scandinavian Creole? Well, to use the phrase of John McWhirter in his book Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue, here it is, English is a magnificent bastard tongue. Yes, it's a hybrid, a beloved Mongol dog, but we cherish it all the same. And if you think that's an interesting story, then check out our video on how English became the global language, or just watch the video that the YouTube algorithm in all its wisdom has chosen for you. Have a beautiful day. Bye.